Hi, I'm Dan Pignato, and welcome to the A-List. With me is a man who has been writing about your favorite sports teams and players for years. He has won countless awards and has written about many sports icons. Joining me on this edition of the A-List is Steve Aschburner, a sports writer for NBA.com. Hi, and welcome.
Hi, Daniel.
So could you just explain what NBA.com is and the process you go through for writing for it?
Sure. NBA.com is the official website of the NBA.
Okay.
But now people will jump to the conclusion that the NBA runs the website. Not exactly.
They don't?
No. NBA.com is owned by Turner Sports out of Atlanta. They're the people that run TNT, TBS.
Oh, okay.
You know, the big CNN empire. So what Turner does is contract with the NBA to operate its website. And so they provide the content, they provide the video. The NBA has approval of a lot of these things, but in terms of people like myself, there are 6 writers.
Oh.
And we were brought in from independent media. We all used to work in newspapers and other forms of journalism. We were brought in, and part of the condition of our deal with NBA.com is that the NBA doesn't really censor or filter what we do. We're allowed to have our opinions. We're allowed to analyze things the way we see them.
It gives you more freedom to tell the stories you want.
It gives us freedom. It gives us credibility, too. It gives the website, we think, credibility. Because if people think, well, this is just the NBA's corporate message and they'll never run anything critical of Ron Artest or, you know, any incident.
They'll just tell the good things.
Yeah. And so, you know, it would hurt. They wouldn't get the traffic. It wouldn't be good for business. Yeah. There's value in being credible because it will draw more people.
Yeah, and telling the truth.
Right.
And so I see you brought a book here. Could we?
Oh, I just brought this along. This was the Bulls program at the start of the playoffs. And, you know, as you could see at the bottom there, it says round 1. The Bulls, I guess, are optimistic, as most fans were, that there would be multiple rounds. As we sit here right now, that might not be the case. Yeah,
well, they were in first place at the time, and just everything was going good.
Yeah, they had the best record in the league for the 2nd straight regular season. They seemed to be getting healthy just in time. Derrick Rose was back and available. They looked really good for 46 minutes of game 1. And then with about 1:20 to go, tragedy struck. Derrick Rose blew out a knee ligament, done for the playoffs, done well into next season, and everything has gone downhill for the Bulls since.
Oh, wow. So along with that, could you just talk about the different kinds of stories you would do for NBA.com? If you could put a number on, how many stories have you done altogether?
Well, let's see. I've worked for them for a little more than 2.5 years. I guess if you average out the amount of the number of stories I write in an average year for them, which would probably be about 200. Wow. So we're up around 500 stories in the time I've been with them. Which is really nothing. I mean, I've been at this so long, you know, over 30 years for newspapers primarily.
It's just like second nature writing all these now?
No, it's not second nature. Yeah, any one of them can really be a difficulty. You sit down, certain times you can't wait to sit down and write, and it just sort of flows out of you as if you had written it before. Yeah. And other times you sit down there and you can't even type the first word. So, you know, writer's block, whatever you want to call it, it gets tough.
Oh, wow. Can you talk about how you got started in sports writing?
Sure.
A little bit.
I grew up in Brookfield and didn't go to RB, went to LT in LaGrange. But my father would take the train to work. He worked in the city. And he actually was a pressman. He worked on the presses that would print newspapers. So, but he would come home every night and he'd have the morning paper and the evening paper and I'd read them, and I liked sports and I liked writing. I was kind of a shy kid, and so I liked writing because I didn't like to get up in front of a group and speak, but if I wrote something, maybe people would see what I was thinking, but I wouldn't have to sell it. And it just seemed like, boy, look at these guys. These guys write about sports. That would be a neat thing to do. So I'm one of those people who early on kind of identified what he wanted to do. Oh, wow. And then I never found anything that distracted me too much from that, and I stayed with it.
So this was always your dream job?
I guess it was a dream job. I mean, I thought it would eventually lead to other things in the newspaper world. but I had no idea back in, you know, the early to mid 70s when I was starting out that the newspaper world was going to change so dramatically.
Yeah.
So a lot of people that had goals and aspirations in newspapers, we've had to adjust on the fly.
Oh, okay. And can you talk about the daily routine of the process of getting a story written, or like how you get it published?
Well, you know, with the internet, things are a little bit different. You know, with newspapers, you were always, you worked backwards from when that newspaper had to hit people's doorsteps, which means it had to come off the truck. You know, it actually had to come out of the carrier's hands, and it had to get on the truck. It had to get from the presses, folded, and all that mechanical process. Now it's a matter of punching some buttons on keyboards to post stories on the internet. And so we have, you think that that's freedom because you're not as stuck, well, the presses are gone, you missed your deadline, you have to wait till tomorrow. On the other hand, you're always on deadline. It's a 24/7 news cycle now. Stories get published, you know, online at any time of the day. And so if news breaks, you have to be faster in many ways than you did in newspapers.
Oh, okay. And could you talk about which story you were the most proud of writing?
Well, the one I was happiest with and got a great reaction just from one particular person, I interviewed Muhammad Ali.
Oh, really?
Back in 1984. And he was just showing some signs. It was starting to dawn on the public at large that he was, you know, having trouble with his faculties. I guess eventually it was diagnosed as Parkinson's. But the early signs, people just thought, well, he took too many punches. Interviewed him, great interview, he was generous with his time. I wrote it up, and in the area I was living in Milwaukee, I went into a store, a corner store, and the guy who owned the store had the article taped to the wall behind the register. And you know, it was just seeing that there, you know, and my face was on it. It was a column. So the guy's like, hey, wait a minute, you know, like, yeah, I wrote that. And he's like, oh, I love that. I thought it was the greatest thing, you know, and my father was about ready to cry. Wow. It just took one guy's reaction like that, and it, you know, it kept me going for months.
That's amazing how like a story can have that effect on people.
Yeah, it really can. You know, the written word can be pretty powerful. It's not the dominant media form anymore as it was, you know, in 40s, 50s, 60s, even 70s. But boy, yeah, I think there's still great value, and that's why I continue to do this.
Yeah. And speaking of Muhammad Ali, is he the most famous person you've ever met?
Well, I met Gerald Ford on a golf course. He played at a golf tournament up in Milwaukee.
Nothing to do with writing, just met him on a golf course?
No. I was covering the golf tournament, and he was there, so I interviewed him very briefly. And I guess you say if you interview a president, that's pretty famous. But I think Muhammad Ali is probably more famous. And then, you know, I've been fortunate during the time I've worked to meet. I interviewed even Ted Williams one time in his hotel suite, and he got so excited talking about the art of hitting. You know, I'm sitting there like you, and he stands up, and he's got an imaginary bat at an imaginary plate, and he's showing me things, and like, you know, this is amazing. So, you know, I really feel like I've been able to hit some of the greatest in pretty much all the sports. I mean, I've interviewed Gretzky, I've interviewed Jordan, I've interviewed Montana, you know, and it just, I've had a nice sweet spot in terms of my career where it's been pretty neat.
It sounds like it. And would you have any advice for a person who's looking to get into this field of work?
Yeah, you know, the field changes. It's changed so much since I started, and it changes every day. The best thing I can say is to just be passionate about it and work as hard as you can, where you can. I mean, if you find an opening, if you can get an internship, if you can not even a formal internship somewhere, but just be available. I think a lot of newspapers, when I started, I got in the door while I was in school by covering my high school team for the very local suburban paper, and also then by working a lowly job, taking bowling scores over the phone and typing them up on an old manual typewriter at this newspaper in Milwaukee. And you know, just being around. You know, somebody said like showing up is 90% of success, and just being around, being available, and if say an editor says, geez, I need somebody to go out and do a quick interview with so-and-so, they're only in town for a few, and they see you sitting there you might get
Yeah,
that
they're gonna send
opportunity and
you.
it leads to other things. So finding those cracks and filling them
Yeah.
is key.
I would like to thank my guest, Steve Aschburner. I'm Daniel Pignato, and make sure to stay tuned for the next episode of The A-List.